Hi, I'm Olivia, and today I'm interviewing Claire Goodchild, the author of the Book of Seances and the artist of the Memento Mori Oracle deck and the Antique Anatomy Tarot deck. I already did a book review on her book, so if you want to check that out, that will be up here. You are more than welcome to listen to this podcast style and keep us on in the background while you do something, or you can hang out with us and watch the full interview all the way through. But otherwise, here's Claire Goodchild.
I'm Claire. I run the account Black in the Moon. I go by she and her pronouns. I am originally just a tarot deck creator, and that's kind of where I began my exploration into the entire, I don't want to say like witch space, but that's what it is. And then I branched out into writing books.
I did a review on your book already,
Mhm.
and a lot of people had a lot of different questions. I think spirit work is one of those things that it's a hard thing to explain. It's kind of something that you do have to kind of experience and
Mhm.
do rather than just
Right.
explain to somebody. So for people who are new or intimidated about spirit work, what kind of advice would you give somebody who wants to dip their toe in but isn't exactly sure and is kind of worried? Because I think safety is one of the biggest things that
Mm.
people are worried about.
Right. So I think the most important thing is understanding why you want to do spirit work. And a lot of people think that they need to have these like big, profound reasons, but it can just be because you're curious. You want to see if it works. You want to talk to ancestors, whatever it is, but you want to be clear about the why. You don't want to, I think with any type of craft stuff, you know, having a good starting point is the most important thing. And in spirit work, that should be your starting point. Um, as for safety, I think that a lot of the beliefs are rooted in, Christianity, especially like 80s, 90s kind of Christianity from the United States. And while there's nothing wrong with it, inherently, it can really make people nervous about things that they don't need to be nervous about. I like to think if everything over on the other side is so bad, does that mean when we get there it's going to be bad and evil too? Like I don't think that can be the case. So, yeah, your why and just don't be nervous. I know it sounds like more simple than it actually is. Like when you go and sit down and all that anxiety and anticipation is like coursing through your body. But yeah, just always remember to go in calm. And, a lot of these things will reveal themselves to you on the way. You don't have to know everything right at the start.
Yeah. I think my advice usually is to try ancestor work because it is spirit work, but
Mm,
it's the people close to you. But then that kind of opens that whole can of worms of like, what if my ancestors weren't good people? And then what if
right.
I'm adopted? And like there's a lot of different
Mhm.
pieces of that. Do you have any advice for those people or for ancestor work or just even like starting that?
I think so I do believe that you should talk to a spirit, or at least someone you're related to or close to, like a friend, something like that. Because it's going to, again, bring down that comfort and, make you feel protected and secure. Um, and you know what? Just pick one person. So just like we don't all have good ancestors, we don't have all bad ancestors either. Like there is someone who will be in your corner, even if you can't name them specifically, you might feel them or, even dream about them. Some people start dreaming about ancestors the moment they decide to like take on that journey. So yeah, just pick one person and work with them or just ask them to be there with you. I think that's a good place to begin.
What kind of, so like if you're sitting, like walk me through, if you're sitting at your ancestor altar,
Mhm.
set it up. Now what?
Yeah, see, the thing with ancestor work, it's so personal, right? Like it's you and it's all these generations of you, even if you're adopted, right? Like your adopted family is still your family. That's what influences you. Um, I so for most people, I just say like start with something small, like a candle and just see how you feel after you light it. And then if you think, okay, I feel pretty good, I'm going to go a little further and maybe try divination and talk to a spirit and, just do it in little pieces. Like nothing has to be all at once. And if you feel called to have a big ceremony, like the big classic seance style, like do that. If your idea of a seance is just talking out loud to like your grandfather, do that. It's such a personal thing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's like the hardest thing because there's not really like a checklist of, okay, well, first
Right.
do this, then do that, then do
Right.
that. I mean, for a personal note, when I was doing ancestor work and I really started getting into it and like leaving offerings more often, and it was
Mhm.
less of just like kind of talking to them or like pouring, out a little bit of my drink or something. It was more of like a full practice. I started setting out Jim Beam, like for some reason, it was just like the whiskey that I had on hand. And uh I don't know why. I was just like, oh, Jim Beam's just like the go-to. And I left the bottle downstairs at my family's home, and my dad comes in and he looks at my mom and says, "Did you start drinking Jim Beam?" And I said, "Oh no, it's mine." And he goes, "That's so funny. That was his dad's favorite drink." And I never knew that because I never knew him. And I was like, "Oh, that's really funny." So like, and I started seeing like little connections here and there. I never knew my grandfather on my dad's side. So hearing that and seeing all these little connections of that grandfather start to pop in, it was over time, but you start like I didn't even realize that, but I was just kind of doing it, and you're kind of doing the spirit work without even knowing it,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know.
Like he showed up, you thought, okay,
Mhm.
I'm going to start this thing. And then he came to kind of help you along. So I think, that's always so great, isn't it? Like when things just do add up. Oh,
Yeah, start to align. Yeah, it was I don't know if I shared this before, but there was definitely a time where I was talking to a Filipino shaman, and she was like giving readings and like doing ancestor readings. And I was very skeptical, and she's like, "Oh, I connected to a grandfather," and she like gave me this whole story about why he moved from Cebu to America. And I was like, "No, that doesn't add up. Like that's not the story that I know of." And when I asked my dad after that, he was like, "Oh yeah," and like connected all the dots. And I had no idea. Like I didn't know any of those.
right.
I was like, "Oh, okay, so maybe she was telling the truth." Like, at first I was like, "Ah, she's a liar," but um that leads me kind of to my other question. So when you go to like a cemetery
Mhm.
and maybe you're meeting, you know, friends or family, or you're not, say you find either a family member that you didn't know, or you find a stranger that for some reason you're just attracted to that grave, how do
Mhm.
you go about researching that or that person?
Oh, my favorite thing. So, uh, when it comes to graves specifically, the first thing you want to do is go to findagrave.com. That is going to be
Oh, I
your
didn't even know that
best
that was a thing.
friend.
That's so
Yeah.
straightforward.
Yeah. And you can, input the name on the grave and years on headstones aren't always right. So this website has an option to like add or subtract a year or two. So like if any birth records or obituaries come up, it's going to hit them all. So that's, a really wonderful place to start. So that always your first step is findgrave.com.
Interesting.
um, yeah. And then from there, I think, you're going to have to do more old school kind of searching. So like library archives and things like that. And, I'm assuming that in this situation, you want to like build a relationship maybe or figure out what offerings and things or how to communicate with them. And a lot of that's just going to come down to trial and error, really, or if you learn that they were a knitter or something, like offering knitting needles or, things that were popular from the neighborhood they were alive. Like, you do have to put in work. Well, spirit work can be like simple, like having a conversation the way we are, but you still need to show that you're serious, like to some degree. And I think doing research is the best way to do that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I think I haven't told the public about the mirror writings yet.
Right.
I messaged you about.
Yeah.
So for those of you watching, I've had this mirror for like 5 years or something. I got it at a garage sale, and it, I've cleaned it, and I'm pretty sure I've even have like videos somewhere where I'm like cleansing my space and like protecting my areas, and I usually wipe down my mirrors. And so it's not like I just leave these dirty for 5 years, right? And I messaged
Right.
Claire because I'll like have to put the photo somewhere on there. And it's just so weird. So I even messaged my little brother and was like, "Did you like visit and get in my room and whatever?" And he's like, "Why would I do that?" And I messaged like my two friends that ever come into my room, and asked them if they wrote something on my mirror. And it was super strange because it was just like a name, and then like it was just a name, and then like a little scribble of like a crown or something. And I don't remember exactly what it is. I wrote it down somewhere, but I'll have to put those photos up. It's just super strange. So I tried to do some research on it. I couldn't really find anything on that. I don't know if it
Mhm.
was like what you said, if it was just somebody being like, "Hey, I'm here," and like acknowledge me,
Yeah.
and then thanks, and then leaving, or if it was, something a little more than that. So couldn't tell you because I have no idea what that could
Yeah.
possibly mean. But if it ever comes up
Yeah.
again, I don't know.
It
Um, oh no, go ahead.
it's such a it was such a like funny and interesting message to get from you. Like, hey, this thing happened. It was just really like, like that is my happy place when I can at least try and help someone like decipher like a random spirit like with research. It's the best.
Well, and that, like, I do a lot of spirit work, but I've never had something that's like that upfront. And
Right.
like I said, like it just doesn't make sense of how that got onto that mirror, because I don't live with anybody who just waltz into my room and would write things
Right.
on my mirror, and like I said, I clean that mirror at least monthly on every dark moon. So I have no idea where that came from. And if it was a spirit, I don't know what they wanted. I haven't had anything happen after that. Um, but yeah, it's like spirit work is usually much more subtle than just like writing a full ass name on somebody's
Yeah.
mirror. So that's why I was like, maybe I should ask the spirit worker herself and see what she thinks.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if now that you've talked about it, like something will pop up more. Maybe that gives you kind of a clue that I
Maybe.
find that happens a lot with me,
Mhm.
so that would be interesting.
Yeah, we'll have to see. But I mean, I definitely have it in my archives in my little journal of everything that runs through my head. So that will, maybe I'll come back to it and be like, oh, that's so weird a couple of years later or something. What, okay, so not my first, but one of my first decks and the most used decks is your Antique Anatomy.
Oh,
I
thank you.
love that deck. And then also I have the Memento Mori Oracle,
Mhm.
and I also love that deck. And that's the one that I bring to cemeteries anytime I visit.
Yes.
Yeah, it's perfect for that. It truly is. So what's your inspiration for your art behind those? And like, I mean, I know, but I want to know like in depth.
Right. So I think generally people can gather that I'm like really into the aesthetics of the Victorian era, not the people or, you know,
Yeah,
colonization,
me
things
too.
like
It's
that,
okay.
but the look, it was such a weird time, where you have like scientific stuff going on, but you have an appreciation for art still in a way I don't think we have anymore. And, there was seriousness and skepticism, but then there's also divination and, modern ghost hunting was born during that time. So it's just a weird period for art. And so that really speaks to me. And being, kind of a history nerd and an art history nerd, looking through all these old books and stuff is really what kicked everything off. Like I thought, like, well, what if the way the people from this period are combining things. Can I combine things too? So like these pieces, but make them divination, or these ideas and turn them into something spiritual. Yeah, just, you know, anything that you think a Victorian vampire would like, I like. So, it sounds so corny, but really like it's just the way everything looks from that period is just beautiful. Yeah, I wish there was something deeper that I could offer you, but yeah, it's just an aesthetic thing. Like
Mhm.
as an artist, that's what speaks to me. So,
Yeah. I mean, you capture it really well because there's that touch of like natural illustration, like natural history
mm.
illustration that I am just a whore for. I
Okay.
love that kind of like just, any botanical drawings and
Mm, yeah.
like the old grimoire type of thing where they kind of like just the documentation. And then I agree with you, the Victorian, I mean, obviously the Victorian
Right.
vibe is my favorite. And I think a lot of that is like the attention to detail. And maybe that's just
Hmm.
like, you know,
Totally.
like I said, the neurotic piece of me that it just like tickles my brain in the right way of the
Hmm.
attention to detail of like everything. If you look at their furniture and their crown moldings and like just everything has this beautiful detail to it. So no matter
Hmm.
where you're looking, there's something to there's something to look at. It's not plain or boring, a little bit extra.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anything extra is
Yeah.
perfect.
Yes. Me too. Um, so circling back, this whole conversation is going to be a mess because none of my questions are in a specific order, but so going back to spirit work and kind of like that
Hmm.
safety, um, first question, have you ever had like a spirit interaction that made you uncomfortable or like
Hmm.
weirded out? And then if you want to share that, if not, that's fine. Um, and then after that, what's your go-to banishing for both just general and for spirits that are being problematic?
Okay. So something, so I think when I was younger, when I didn't really understand, you know, ghosts, or I hadn't looked into the history, which of certain tools. Like I think everyone has like a bad Ouija board story. At least most people do. So I never actually had an experience with one, but I was nervous about them. And I didn't want them around me until I started actually looking into it and realized, like, oh, it's just a tool like anything else. But as other than that, like, I've had things that make me nervous. Like, I guess the closest thing would be this summer. I had the weirdest dream. Like, I don't know how to explain this, but I don't see images in my head like when I close my eyes, it's just black, but like I have the idea of images, or like I can't visualize, but I can dream. And I dreamt of a poster in like a dark hallway that had a man's face, and he was covering his face a little bit but looking through, two fingers his eye, and underneath it said Freddie the Hangman's ghost. And then I woke up and I felt like really to the point, like nervous to the point where I texted my boyfriend who is not home. And I didn't want to go back to sleep, and I could feel something in my room with me. Um, and so I did what I always do, and I get up and I start researching, and I realized that it was a spirit of this guy who had been hung 120 years prior, here in Toronto. And once I did the research, I realized, oh, he's not bad. He's just saying, like, again, like the mirror thing, like, oh, I'm just here, you know,
Mhm.
and you're open to me. So I'm going to come see, what I can tell you. Since then, I try to look at things like, is it negative or bad, or am I just nervous? And I think
Mhm.
that's something humans do. Whenever we feel afraid, we automatically assume something is evil or wrong, or even if you think about like spiritual practices around the world, like with colonization, they were all framed as bad because it was something other than what we deem as normal. And I think we all have internalized that a little bit. So negativity, I think the first thing is just research and really connecting with yourself. Like, am I just nervous because I don't understand or it startled me? Or does this actually feel dangerous?
I always tell people that dangerous and intense are not the same thing. You know, when you meet intense people, it doesn't mean that they're dangerous. Like I've met a lot of people who are just very intense people, but they're not dangerous.
Mm,
They're just intense people. And
yeah.
likewise with spirits, there's spirit guardians at the specific cemetery that I've gone to, and they're intense, but they're not there to like harm or hurt. They're just intense because they're intense protectors. So I
Yeah.
think
They have
they
a
have a
job.
purpose. Mhm.
Yeah.
So I agree with that to a whole, and I do think that it's really important to be able to differentiate that, especially when you're doing spirit work and especially when you're working
Mm,
with maybe tools that you're unsure of and you're uncomfortable with, of just like, am I just afraid because it's intense, or am I afraid because I feel like I'm in danger?
exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Just that's why I think it goes back to like the first question of knowing your why. Like, why do you want to work with spirits? Like, I think that can really ground you and keep you on track when you are feeling nervous. Like,
Mhm.
um, and as for like banishing, so for me, a lot of things come down to cleaning, like physically cleaning. I always feel better when I clean. So that's always the first step. And then honestly, like have a bit of an open door policy. So it's not that often that I try and tell anything to go or even, force anything to go. I think that's because I've got really strong boundaries though. So it doesn't really happen to me that often. But I like sound. So sound is a big one. Um, I find it to be extremely cleansing. Um, I don't know why bells, it's just a thing for me. But I know for other people, like sometimes having a big, ritual or step-by-step process is really important. And again, I think that goes back to like making yourself feel secure. And if you're secure, you're going to have stronger boundaries. And then if you have stronger boundaries, things aren't going to get to you as much.
Mhm.
So yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, there's cleaning is definitely one of my things. I'll just go through and clean every, like there is no place to hide here, and if you are here, then I know that you're here. And I
Mm,
have a very similar policy with that you do, of as long as you're not causing me any issues or,
mhm.
irritating me, I don't mind if you're here, and leave whenever, come whenever, whatever, but just don't cause me any issues. And
Yeah.
something that you said earlier, and I didn't write it down. Now it's probably gone forever. Uh, you were saying that after you had this dream of this man, and that he was just kind of showing up and like, hey, what's going on? I have a lot of questions when I tell people
Mhm.
that, like, okay, well, why are spirits, if they don't have anything to tell you, right? Why are spirits just showing up just to like let you know that they're there? And I've found, and tell me if this is your experience as well, I've found that spirit work is very similar to interacting with people.
Mhm.
Just people. I mean, people are spirits too. We just have a physical, meat sack to walk around in. But um, if you're standing in the grocery line and somebody behind you is just like, it's really cold out today, isn't it? And like, there's no reason why they're telling you that. They're just speaking to you to speak to you. And so
Exactly.
depending on if you're introverted or not, you can be like, the fuck are you talking to me? Or like you're like, oh yeah, it's really cold out. Like it just depends on where you're
Mhm.
at. And at least for me, I find that spirit work is less energy than people work. At least for those things. And even so, I can just be like, okay, hi, and then they're done. There's not like small talk otherwise. But I think that it's similar to that, and I think that that's kind of misinterpreted sometimes. Like
Mhm.
people think that spirits always have these like grand things to tell you,
Right.
when in reality they can just be like, they can just pop in and just be like, I hate the whiskey that you're drinking, and you're like, okay. Or like, they'll come by and they're like, I hate these flowers, and you're like, and then you'll never
Thanks.
see them again, and you're like, that was rude, like you're just like, there, it's very similar to interacting with people. And I think
Right.
that that's something that once you understand that and you start to interact with spirits a little more like you interact with people, there's that shift,
Totally.
at least spirits of the dead, like clearly,
Right.
or, but when it comes to like non-human spirits, I think that that's where things change a little bit. Do you do
I
a lot of non-spirit or non-human spirit work?
uh only in cemeteries, like you mentioned cemetery guardians earlier. A lot of the time they're human to me anyway. But every once in a while you get energies in cemeteries that are something else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not something I actively seek out though. Uh, it just if they come to me, that's fine. But I'm not gonna like go to them.
Yeah. Um, and then again, circling back to a totally different thing. You mentioned that you don't like in that dream that you don't visualize, like you're
Right.
not good at visualizing. How do you meditate?
So for me, meditating is, this is going to sound so pretentious, exercise. Cardio to me is when I meditate. It's the only time when my mind goes kind of quiet. Um, so that's how I do it. And, it's hard to explain not visualizing because I don't see anything in my mind. It's black, but I can still come up with ideas and I
Mhm.
know what they would look like. I just don't actually see them. So like it's like an internal knowing. um I don't know if I'd be able to do like a more classic form of
Yeah.
meditation, but I think it's an important thing for people to try at least once. Because it can make you feel really secure and grounded. But yeah, for me, it's exercise. Specifically, when I'm riding a horse, I am just at peace, and that's when everything can kind of just go calm and you know helps me.
Yeah. Do you focus on like other of the senses, like visualize visualizing like a feeling or a
Right.
smell or a sound rather than like something that you would be able to see?
Sound is a big one. Yeah. Um, and thoughts. I think thoughts and words. I also don't have an inner dialogue. I'm one of those weird
You
genetic.
don't?
No.
Oh, I'm so
So
jealous.
like I know what I'm gonna say to you as I'm saying it, but I hear my voice, but there's no voice outside of my thoughts. It's
Hmm.
yeah. So I think for me, repeating quotes is a good one. Especially when I'm feeling anxious. I mean, a lot of people do that. They just do it with like scripture or, you know, uh classic mantras and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, feeling I don't know if I like, yeah, sound and just thoughts would be the two things that come up most.
Okay. Yeah, because like usually meditation in just my, or I think a good general like blanket is just being able to focus on one thing. It's not,
Mhm.
and like everybody's gonna get distracted. It's not like being pure and having no thoughts whatsoever. It's more like if you are able to realize that you have become distracted and then bring it back to whatever you were
Mm,
focusing on, that's meditation. I think that that's overthought a lot of the time, or at least when people are talking about it, they're thinking that it's like my mind is never silent. It's like, bitch, my never for me. But if I can just focus on just the candle flame, and yeah, sure, like things might be going through my head, but if I'm still focusing on the candle flame, and then now I'm thinking about like what I'm getting for groceries, and I'm like, oh, I'm distracted, and I pull it back to the candle flame,
mm.
I'm meditating. Like that's not
Right.
that I'm bad at meditating. It's just that I'm realizing that I'm distracted and coming back to it.
That's what
Um,
it is for you. Yeah,
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 I like that way of looking at it.
yeah. I think it helped too because like I said, when you're learning about it online, especially, people are like, you shouldn't have any thoughts. It should just like your brain cells should be like sleeping, and you're like, I can't do that. But when it's just like the actual act of just, oh, I'm distracted and coming back to it, I think that
Mhm.
helps a lot of easing that pressure to be like, no thoughts, brain empty type of thing. Do you have any favorite spirit interactions that you would like to share? Like any of your
Yeah.
favorite?
Um, so I think the most important one I wrote in the book, well, I wrote a couple important ones in the book, but uh in the tarot chapter about a friend of mine who went missing, and basically he told me, what happened to him through
Yeah.
the cards. And, you know, I don't think, even though that is like deeply painful, I don't think any other experience will ever top it. It sounds weird to say top it because it's such a horrible
No,
situation,
yeah,
but
but like kind of like the importance or the
yeah,
memorability of it.
exactly. Yeah, it's just something that I don't think will ever like I can just I feel it every time I think about it, like just that moment of being told, by a spirit specifically, like very odd details. And I don't actually tell the whole story in the book. There's an extra little part where more cards came out, and one of them was the tower. And I was like, okay, well, that, makes a lot of sense. But it turned out that he was found just near Tower Trail in a provincial park. So there was more things to it. And, you know, I'm thankful for that experience. See,
Yeah,
it's
it's
such a
a it's a
weird thing to
strange,
say, right? You
yeah.
know, but it set me down this path, and it's what made me want to write the book. So like he gave me something, and I don't think any other spirit will ever be able to give me that.
Right. No, that makes
Yeah.
sense. I loved that story and the fact that you were able to kind of do that spirit communication, and then on
Mm,
top, it's the type 5 in me, but like on top of that, of getting validated later on, of all of the things that this spirit told you and you kind of wrote down and
mm,
received, and then to be basically validated and told everything that you were told is
yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
How do you go about balancing that skepticism and the spirituality? Like, it's very hard to,
I
stay
know.
in the middle there and
Yeah.
not go too far on one end.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is being a skeptic is actually really important, especially you need to have a little bit, because if you don't, you are just going to go, you know, wildly down one direction. I think writing the book actually made me more skeptical because I was doing so much research about these stories, that people share and everyone knows. And like, they're just not plausible. But at the same time, I then expect people to believe the stories I'm writing down. And to me, they're very real. So I think the balancing comes down to how you feel about it, because at the end of the day, it is about your experience. So I can tell you all these things that's happened to me, but unless I believe it, it doesn't really mean anything. Um, but I do think one thing that kind of believers have as an advantage is we're open to skepticism, whereas skeptics are rarely open to believing, right? So I think balance has to go both ways. But
Mhm.
yeah, be skeptical. I think it's really important, you
Yes, and I
know?
think that's one of my top favorite things about your book. Because I've mentioned a lot in my videos that I'm one of the most skeptical witches you'll ever meet. And even when things manifest for me, like I had something huge manifest for me recently, and I was like, oh shit, it worked. Like, yeah, and I've been practicing for over a decade, well over a decade at this point. And so it's just funny that I'm still surprised by it, that I'm like, oh yeah, holy shit. So like, thank you for always keeping like a level head in that book, because I think that a lot of the other spirit books that I read,
Mm.
it is very like, just believe it. If you just believe it, then all of it's true. And it's like, I,
It can't, not everything can't be true. Like it just
right,
goes against the laws of everything. Not
right,
everything can be right or true. It's
correct.
just,
But, and it is a weird thing because it's kind of like, there is really no proof, you know? So
Yeah.
it is at the end of the day kind of like just up to interpretation of however you want
Yeah.
to interpret those experiences. So I do really appreciate that because I don't think that I've read a spirit work book specifically
Oh.
that has skepticism in it. In a healthy way, right?
Yeah.
Have you read the book Walking the Twilight Path?
No, I don't
I feel
think
like
so.
I
I
feel like
read a lot of books and like I'm not good with remembering titles. Who's
that's
it written
okay.
by?
I'm not good at names. Hold on. I can't see it from here. I think it's like Michelle something. Fuck, I don't
Mm,
know. But it's really good. It's kind of about just like working with death mainly,
mm,
and less about like working with the dead, but more about kind of working with
yeah.
death and
Yeah.
the idea. Um, so when I think this is going to be the last question, but don't worry if it's like a whole thing. A lot of my viewers want to start working in cemeteries and
Hmm.
kind of like gaining relationships with the cemetery and the spirits
Yeah.
within. How would you even begin doing that? So you just found a cemetery near you. Now what? What do you bring? What do you bring? What do you do when you get there? Do you like just walk around? Do you find a grave? Like offerings?
Hmm.
How do we even do this?
So you're kind of in luck because I just finished writing the like sequel to Book of Seances called The Book of Ancestors, and there's a whole cemetery chapter in
Oh,
it.
fuck yeah.
So yeah. So the first thing you come across a cemetery, you need to do research about the area. That always has to be first. You know, you I look at the cemetery as a city, and then like plots are like neighborhoods and things like that. And you don't walk into someone's house and start going through their stuff, right? Or asking them questions. So you need to get to know the area you're working with because that shows a certain amount of respect. Like if I go to a cemetery and I say, hey, look, I know you were created in this period and I've done a lot of research to try and figure out who the guardian is, or they're more likely to let you into the neighborhood and it's going to be a more enjoyable experience. So that's first, always research. I People are going to get really annoyed about that, but like
No, that's my whole entire channel. So don't even if they're here, then they know to do research.
yeah, like contact your local like historical society or you know genial
Genealogist,
yeah,
I
like
think.
something like yeah, like some kind of organization like that first, because they're going to have records that probably aren't online and they are
Mm.
really into all this stuff and they are going to throw information at you and be excited about it, so they are your best friends in this scenario. Then from there, I think the the next thing would be just to go and visit it. Don't ask for anything, don't bring anything, just see how you feel there and see how everyone there feels about you, right? Because you're going into their space. And I even though I said I don't really work with like spirits outside of like human stuff, but understanding the animals and the plants and everyone who lives there is also important. Because it's their home too. And then after that, what you want to do is get a notebook, right? Go for your second trip to the cemetery and just start jotting things down that come to you. So, you notice a nice tree, you want to figure out what kind of tree that is, or you notice the headstones are all from a certain period. You want to write all this stuff down. So you got the history that you got from, doing research, and then history or information that you're getting on your own. And then your third trip, your third trip. I know none of this applies if you just like go to a place and you're visiting and you see a cemetery. I'll do a little condensed version for that. But your third trip, bring something for the guardian. Um, you know, pennies, things like that. Like I like to call it paying the toll, like um that's usually good. And then you know, from there, I think you can start doing divination or talking to specific spirits or things like that, because you've put in the legwork, of trying, at least trying to get to know, the area and the people there. And that's where the real fun starts, I think, when you discover something like I wrote about in the book, finding my ancestor's headstone that was like totally underground. And it wasn't the first time I had been there. So,
That
I've done the work.
I loved that story because that's like exactly how spirits it is a
I
little
know.
bit more like direct, at least for
Yeah.
me. Because I always tell people, I'm like, my spirit team know that I'm a dumbass and they just need to like tell me
Yeah.
exactly. Because like
Yeah.
I'll read too much into it or something and they'll just be like, just it's right there. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh,
Exactly.
oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mine were literally like grave shovel, just look, and it turned out to be a good thing. But yeah, I guess from there, it kind of depends, like, is the cemetery where you have family or is it just one that you're interested in? And that's going to like inform who you talk to and the way you talk to them, right? So I think that's important. And then if you're on vacation or something and you come across a cemetery and you don't really have time to research and you're like, "Oh, I just really need to go into it," 'cause who doesn't go into a cemetery when they pass it, right?
Pull over if I'm on a road trip. I'll be like, there's
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. In those instances, I think usually the two main things you should do is try and at least read any information that's posted, because usually they'll have like those plaques or whatever. So at least you're going in with some idea of the place, and always leave coins or something for the guardian at the gate or wherever you cross. Um and yeah, when in doubt, just pick a grave that you feel called to and leave a little something, like a pretty rock, even, Um, yeah. I mean, I can't, to me, like, I can't say really don't do what you want to do, because again, all this stuff is very personal, but that's just my way of working in a cemetery. So other people go right in and they're like, yeah, I'm taking graveyard dirt by, like, and it works for them, but like I I couldn't do it. And I think it just is the way I'm programmed. So.
Yeah. I definitely think graveyard dirt, like working with that, it's so strange because it's like hyped up a lot,
Mhm,
but the going about and getting it, and then also the actual usage of it, it's like
mhm.
how often are you needing, like, and why, why and why so abruptly too, like this isn't something that you've like been thinking about, so it's like, okay, if I am thinking about maybe doing this spell or ritual that it requires graveyard dirt, it's not something that I feel like it's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna, like, run to the graveyard." It's, like, not a grocery store, right? Like, that's just me, though, like, I would assume that for whatever usage, like, you have this planned, so you can at least make some
Right.
sort of, like, "Hi, my name's Olivia. Nice to meet you," instead of just, like, raw dogging it and going in there and just, like, grabbing some dirt and throwing it in your
Yeah.
backpack, and you're like, "Okay."
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Graveyard dirt, it's such a funny one. Like, so I use graveyard dirt. I don't, okay, I've got permanent dirt and then I have working dirt, which sounds kind of pretentious. So my permanent dirt is all from any ancestors' graves that I've had access to. And to me, they're like little anchors kind of to like draw the spirit in. Like they can find me better. And a whole ancestor altar is that thing. It's just like another layer on top of
right.
the altar. And then I have working dirt, which is a mixture of a little bit of dirt from all of my ancestors into one jar. And, I've had the same one for like 5 years, six, around there. And I have barely made a dent in it. So yeah, I don't know how people are using graveyard dirt like this.
Like, I guess I suppose I get it because I love dirt magic, which I
Mm,
need to make a video on that because I think
you
it's
should.
underrated. I love dirt magic, but like graveyard dirt is so, I think it's just because personally, like I don't really like asking for help. Both with people or with spirits a lot of the time, unless you're like on my team or you're an
Mhm.
ancestor of mine that I'm close with. It's just not something that I'm like gonna be like, oh, I'm just gonna go find a grave of a judge and like scoop some, like
Right,
that's
yeah.
like, yeah, you could and just see if that spirit is willing to work with you, which I have done where I'm like, I really need help in this situation because I don't know what I'm doing, but that it's not often. Like I can only think of like two times
Mhm.
that I've ever gone to a cemetery and found somebody with that specific and like not knowing the spirit of just like, hey, like it's very transactional. It's not like a friendly thing, And so
Right.
like it, and then also it's so much work, like to go out of your way to go find somebody, find that grave, find that cemetery, go in, leave the offerings, hope that they'll be okay with you working with them, figure out if they
Mm.
are, and then do it's like, I don't know. That again, that's just me. I feel like that's a lot of work to ask some random spirit to just help you, but it is
Well,
what it is.
I feel like you just listed out things so that like show you're willing to make the effort, whereas I
Yeah.
think the internet has kind of um taken it to a just go here and get some, and like you put thought into
Mhm.
it, and I think that's kind of the difference.
Yeah, and I do think that, at least from my perspective, listening to other practitioners that I've read blogs or just spoken to in general, a lot of the time, if that is so, where they're just like, oh, I just like went to the cemetery and picked some up and then tried to use it, things either just like didn't really work well, like it was patchy, or it just like didn't, like it worked, but like in a really fucked up way. And like if I was a
Right.
spirit and somebody was just like, oh, hey, what's up? And just scooped some of my graveyard dirt and worked with it, I'd be like, okay, okay, I'm gonna give you exactly what you fucking asked for. Like, like I'd be petty. I'd be a petty spirit if you didn't. So also, like, what the hell am I doing? I'm dead. I have all the time in the world. So like, if you're
Exactly.
gonna come by, I have time to be petty. That's at least where I'm coming from. But um, yeah, I agree with you. I think if you're at least like showing up and being like, hey, I know that you don't really know me, because it's like asking somebody for money.
Yeah,
Like,
it's it's a currency.
yeah,
Exactly.
it's asking for somebody for money, or like asking your neighbors who like you've only spoken to maybe twice to help you like
Yeah.
move. Like
Yeah.
that's a weird thing to do. So unless you're being like, hey, I will pay you $100 if you will take your Saturday off and help me move
Mhm.
this giant ass heavy oak wood desk, like, and then maybe they'll say yes. But even then,
Mhm.
if you just show up at their door and you're like, hey, help me move, they're gonna be like, what the fuck? Like that's rude.
Yeah.
So I've always found that super weird when people just like raw dog it and you're like, okay, like good luck, I guess. So that's just me. I've taken up a good amount of your time already. Thank you for, giving me your time and answering all of my questions and
Of
whatnot.
course.
Letting me pick your brain. If you want to find Claire and her work anywhere, I will link all of that down below in a little link tree. Definitely check it out. You have a podcast about your Oracle deck, I believe.
I do.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
good. So like, do you talk about like all of the kind of the behind the thought of like each.
So each card, I try and find an interesting like story or the inspiration or something like that. I haven't posted in a while because writing 2 books in a year and a half
Right.
is extremely hard. So the podcast will be back. So anyone caught up, eventually you're going to have new episodes. So
Perfect. Well, I mean, and if you haven't caught up, then you have time to just binge it.
mhm.
So there you go. And then obviously the two decks that I mentioned, there's extension packs, the book that I already made a review on, that will all be linked. So please check those out. And then everything on where to find Claire, I will link those. But again, thank you so much. And I'm going to take you over to my Patreon because they have a ton of questions for you. And we're just going to rapid fire Q&A at you. Sound
Oh
good?
God. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
So that was my interview with Claire Goodchild. I hope that you enjoyed that as much as I did. She's a wealth of knowledge, easygoing, down to earth, much like her voice in her book that she wrote. There is an extended version where it's Q&A style for my Patreons. So if you're interested in either seeing that and also participating in those Q&As with anybody else that I interview on this channel, then go ahead and check out my Patreon and see if that's something that you're interested in. They also get, bloopers and extra videos, early access, all of that good stuff. So I'll leave that link down below, and it's also at the end of this video if you're interested in that. But otherwise, I want to thank Claire for giving me her time and also sending me that wonderful book and giving us a couple of insights on some common questions about spirit work and seances. So as always, thank you so much for watching. Best of luck, be kind to each other, and may your gods treat you as you've treated others. Bye.